asked all of the panelists to tell me why they agreed to be on the panel, but I think it's more exciting if they could each kind of give their answer to the audience. What about this panel made you want to be on it, and did you have something to say before that you felt like you didn't get a chance to say, maybe at a DMA panel or anywhere? And I don't know, who should we start with? Benita, let's start with you.
Okay. First of all, I didn't attend the DMA panel for several reasons. One particular was that there was a lack of diversity on the panel. There was all white males. Second of all, most of the panelists were just recently arrived to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I thought that what was lacking is the kinds of experience of people who have lived here for a number of years, know kind of the lay of the land, so to speak, and understand how things work in a sense. I felt that there were several things that were touched upon but never really talked about. But one of the things in reading, I read the recaps in Glass Tire and D Magazine, and pretty much I knew that this might have happened. But one of the things that I saw in the discourse from the recaps was that there seemed to be a running train of thought in most of the panelists, not all of them, in the sense that what Dallas-Fort Worth needed, and I say Dallas-Fort Worth because one of the things it said it was talking only about Dallas, and I live in Arlington, and I felt kind of left out. So I think Arlington and Fort Worth and Denton and all the areas are really part of this art community. I don't see them as being broken apart. I see them as just one. And then on the bigger scale, I see Texas as even the whole thing. But one of the things that I saw in the commentary was that and it's something that I've seen happen even 20 years ago. There's this idea of thought that we should import creative ideas and talent from other sources. And when this kind of started about a year ago, when Creative Time was giving the Meadows Prize, and they did a survey and report and then a symposium, and they talked about the idea of what we should be doing here. And a lot of the stuff that they talked about, we were already kind of doing. And then they brought people in for the symposiums that from other areas of the country, and with all due respect to what they do, because I think what they do is great, I thought that again it was trying to bring in ideas that may not work here, because I think every city is unique. So the other question came up, or the other comment was brought up, was that maybe we should bring in talented artists to our universities. And they mentioned John Baldessari and Michael Craig Martin. And I thought, well, it's like we already have really talented, really smart people at our universities already who show nationally and internationally and write as well. And I think there's a lack of acknowledgement of what we already have here. The other part of that was that if you think about it, John Baldessari at Cal Arts at one time was just a local artist, and Cal Arts was just a regular university. It didn't have, and LA was not that well. I mean, in the 60s, LA was just beginning its spotlight, and it's really has, they just celebrated their kind of the 50th anniversary of being a major art city through the Pacific Standard Time exhibitions in every nook and cranny of LA and the LA region. So I thought that the other thing that I guess kind of came to mind is that the Jeffrey Grove, who was who's the curator of the Dallas Museum, his second curated show is another European artist. The first one is two European artists, and there's nothing wrong with it. I actually saw the show early this afternoon. I enjoyed it, but at the same time, the Dallas Museum has not done any shows in the last several years that focus on any talent in the Texas area. And I'll have to say kudos to the Nasher, because they're having an upcoming show of Eric Swenson, and it'll be their second show of Texas artists in their museum in recent years, which I commend. And one of the things that I think Peter Doroshenko mentioned was that, and what he's trying to do to contemporary was to mix regional, national, international artists, which I think it could be a very important, an integral part, an important part of a mission statement for any contemporary art museum or institution. And I think that that's really admirable. I know that I'm from Houston originally. I moved here about 15 years ago. Contemporary Arts Museum has that kind of model, and Peter Doroshenko was a curator there in the early 90s, and I think it's one that's commendable. At the same time, one of the things that I saw not too long right after that, when he brought Shepard Fairey into Dallas, was I saw Peter Doroshenko on TV, and he was very excited about the fact that Shepard Fairey's here doing these murals, and very emphatically said, and this is happening in Dallas. And I thought, well, you know, I've been driving in Dallas for a number of years, and I've seen all these murals, and it's like, this is not new. And Shepard Fairey's murals, and again, with all due respect to him, because I think he's a very good artist, many of his murals are not unlike other murals in other cities. So there's nothing really, again, unique. I think the artists who have done murals here, and Peter just showed sour grapes at the Contemporary, and I think, you know, that's unique. I mean, those guys were doing some really good stuff, and I think, again, acknowledging what's happening here and then mixing it up with national and international artists. So I thought that some of those things are things that, again, I think about as an artist, as a curator, director, professor, and so on, because I really think about these types of issues, and which led me to become a curator and become also co-founder of Art Lives magazine. The other thing that was not touched upon, and it's something that, again, I feel real strongly about, is race. The art world is like the rest of the world, I realized. It's, you know, years ago when I started out as an artist, I thought everybody's going to be liberal in the arts, and not really. A lot of collectors are Republicans. You know, they care about making money and they buy art. I mean, that's the truth of it. I have a good friend who's a collector of much of my work down in San Antonio, and he's a hardcore Republican. We have many arguments. He buys my work. And yeah. You know how it is. That's why I could relate to like Wisdom and Sales Avignon. But recently, I was reading a manuscript from UT Press for a book that may be published, and I asked the editor there, Allison Faust, about the series, contemporary art series that they're doing that Dunkerley Endowment has provided, of monographs on Texas artists, and they have published 5 books. Melissa Miller, James Drake, Terry Allen, Vernon Fisher, and Gail Stack, and the next one be coming up is Nick Nicosia. I was in the advisory committee before that series started, and one of the things I suggested and asked, and hopefully would not happen, and it is happening, is that there are no artists of color in that first series of books. And I said that what the Art Fuel is going to get from that is that there is no artist of color that is worth having a monograph, or that maybe QT Press is not inclusive of those artists. You know, so again, those again are things that I think about. The other thing that I would mention, probably not the last thing, but probably not the last thing I would say tonight, but a few years ago, I was at a meeting that Bonnie Pittman, who was still the director at that time at the Dallas Museum, who asked several artists from the area and a few galleries and a few curators and a few collectors to a local collector's home. And she was asking what kinds of experience those people in the room had with the museum, particularly the artists, good and bad. And most of it was good, and then it seemed like this is kind of a feel-good party session. And one of the things I mentioned was that at that time, and running a space in Arlington, I raised my hand and said, Charlie Wiley's never been into our gallery in UT Arlington. I also said that a number of the artists who were in the room, and I could also say the same here, that there are a lot of artists who are shown nationally and even internationally that I think should deserve a survey show or a retrospective at the Dallas Museum or any of the local museums. Because I think that they're getting to the age where they have a long career, and that should be acknowledged. And I think that's one of the things that I think was really important. On the way home from that meeting, my wife is also an artist, and we have a continuing conversation. She talks about women in the visual arts, and we talked about that, she feels like there should be more women in the visual arts, and I talk about being Latino, more minorities. And I said to her, I asked her, how many people in the room were women? And she said, about half. And I said, how many minorities were in that room? Well, it was only me, out of about 40, 50 people. And that's a reality. And, it's like, like I said, the art world is like the rest of the world. And sometimes we don't really see that. I mean, we all, as visual artists, sometimes we are in our own studios, in our own mind. I think that's great, but sometimes we need to really be aware of the bigger picture. And I think that these are the questions I ask of the editor down at UT Press. One of the things I mentioned with Bonnie Pittman at that, I talked about all these things. So I make my feelings known. And, but I think it's important to realize that as an art community, we need to help support one another. I think it's really important. And I don't mean support artists with other artists, but collectors, museums, curators, critics, and so on and so on. For me, it adds to the dialogue, it helps move the dialogue forward, and hopefully it becomes a much more vibrant city, an art city. One of the last things I would say that one of the last questions I think Whittington asked the panel is, will Dallas ever be a LA or New York or London? And my feeling is that it already is. We just need to feel that and think that. I don't know why we have this inferiority complex or this insecurity about, do we need to be like them? We don't need to be like them. We are what we are, and we don't need validation from the outside. Again, we have a lot of smart, talented people in the community, and that we can acknowledge that we do have this resource, and it's really rich.
Thanks, Benito. So Matthew, you're kind of the newest to Dallas, and you're also an artist. So how do you make it work in Dallas as an artist? What are the challenges you're faced with, and what are your perceptions of Texas and Dallas as an incoming artist?
Well, it's a good question. That's what I was trying to kind of put together before coming to this panel discussion. But actually, if you don't mind, I want to respond to Benito's thing, because when I was asked to be on this panel discussion, I thought to myself, I'm another white male, heterosexual white male, and obviously a point of contention with the DMA's panel discussion was that there were white males all on the panel, and I think that was according to what Benito described as being a sort of an unbalanced cultural representation in the arts. I think that the panel discussion was a misrepresentation of what's going on in the visual arts right now. I think that the visual arts, maybe not as much as, it might not be as apparent in Texas, but certainly on an international scale, I think people of color have a very strong representation in terms of gallery representation, museum shows, market sales. Maybe there are, obviously there are areas where it lacks, but I do think, I was just at the Glenn Lagan show today. The Mark Bradford show just recently was one of the shows that I actually came and talked at the DMA about. One of my favorite shows of recent years was the Gabrielle Orozco show in New York City. I think that artists of color are being represented. I don't think that they're being represented throughout time, obviously. I think that you go back 20 years, you go back 10 years even, you definitely see the division. But I think in more recent years now, I think that I mean, look, this is a hard thing for me to say as a white male, so obviously I do not have the experience of living the life of someone of color, but as being as objective as I can right now and looking at the art world, I think it's made great strides in the last 10 years. And I think right now, what might be, in terms of the discussion about what was going on with the DMA, was that it was a real misrepresentation of the strengths of Dallas. I think that one of the strengths of Dallas is its diversity, is that there is such a strong core of certainly Latino artists here, and maybe they're not being represented here in Dallas and in the museums here, but they're making work and they're a majority and they will be represented elsewhere. I'm just not quite sure it's an accurate representation of the art world. I don't know if maybe your intention was to say that it was more about Dallas.
You know, let me say something.
Yeah.
All due respect, Matthew, look around the room. This is really what happens in Dallas. I have an art life, not here, but in Houston. And that's because this is not what you would see in Houston. You would see a really diverse group of art people pulled together. Well, in all the places that I've ever been, and I've been showing there since the 80s, I've never gone to an exhibition opening where it has been primarily just white people. Never. And when I first started showing there, I told Leigh this, I didn't know why they wanted me to come down there because they didn't know me. And here, if they don't know you, you're not going to get anybody coming to your show, white, black, or otherwise. I go to my opening, and there are all these people. I don't know who they are. They're all mixed up, you know. And the gallery owner was like, well, this is what we do down here. And I was just like shocked, you know, because it was like reminiscent of what I was used to in Connecticut, but it was a whole different thing than what I had experienced, you know, when I came to Texas. So I think that I did a talk a long, long time ago to the Women's Caucus when they had their national conference here. And there was this whole discussion about diversity and what have you, and I got up when it was time for me to talk. I said, just look around the room. I'm the only black female here. How can you talk about Women's Caucus being concerned about diversity? How did this happen? You know, I think sometimes it's not apparent to people who are not engaged in the issue of things that we've been dealing with. I mean, I'm 62 years old, so I've been dealing with this for a long time. I'm on this panel, Leigh says, why did we get on here? Because I knew there wasn't going to be a black female up here if I didn't say yes. You know? I don't even know that anybody around here could name too many black female artists in this town. I know a bunch of
There's
them.
one in the room.
That's
Two,
one of my.
there's two.
That's my
See,
that's
we're very
my
diverse.
prodigy, right there. That's my prodigy. Those are the people that I raised. So, you know, y'all wouldn't know about them if we had not had a place for them to incubate.
Well, Vicki,
And that's, hey, Nance.